At innovation and technology through a gender lens. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this event today, this session, is taking place on the unceded traditional ancestral territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And we are grateful to be here gathering at this really important forum. I'm Jocelyn Mackey. I co-lead Grand Challenges Canada. It's my pleasure to be here today moderating this panel together with our partners of MIT Solve and the Skoll Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Grand Challenges Canada, we're an innovation platform. We seed and transition to scale innovations for bold impact. And we take a gender lens and encourage our innovators to take a gender lens in all the work that we do. We're funded by the Government of Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and many other partners. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today, and we're going to have a conversation today. And my hope is that you will leave here with some tangible examples of how taking a gender lens approach in innovating with technology and innovation can have really important impact, sustainable impact. So with us today, we have Kristin, to my first left. Kristin is the co-founder and CEO of Sathi. She has a passion for engineering design that makes a difference in people's lives. She was one of Forbes 30 Under 30 Asian Fellows, a TEDx speaker, and she came all the way from India. So we're a pleasure to have you here. Next, we have Debbie Rogers. Debbie uses both sides of her brain. She's got an electronic and software engineering degree and an arts degree. And combining those, you can imagine the great results. She's the managing director at Pray Celt, and we're really excited to have you here. And last but not least, we've got Patrick Diamond. Patrick is of MIT Solve's health community. He works to nurture relationships with healthcare leaders and entrepreneurs to scale technological solutions to global health challenges. Thank you for being here. So we're going to start, to warm things up, a question for all the panelists. I'd like you to describe how taking a gender lens has had an impact on the work that you do and impacted women and girls. Over to you.
Okay, thank you for having me here. So basically we make eco-friendly sanitary pads. They're completely biodegradable and compostable and don't contain any plastics or chemicals. Our co-founding team is 3 women out of 4. And we also have 24 women out of our team of 33. So we have a significant number of women on our team. And I think in the beginning, when we started developing the idea for a completely compostable pad, we actually had started with the issue of access to sanitary pads, and we wanted to solve that in a way of designing a machine that could be used in villages to make the product locally. But then we reevaluated the whole ecosystem of where we were kind of developing this product and saw that we could really innovate more on the materials that were being used, because we saw that women didn't really like the pads that were commercially available, and they were already complaining and trying to get the companies to change the materials. And so we thought we could do a little bit of research to kind of develop the pad again from scratch. Yeah.
Thanks. Debbie, do you want to give a little introduction?
Yeah, thanks. So I am from PrayCelt.org, as you mentioned, and we're an organization based and founded in South Africa, and we use mobile technology to improve people's health, particularly focusing on using the devices in people's hands and the way that they already communicate, things like SMS, WhatsApp, chat, etc. And we spearheaded the development of a program for the National Department of Health called Mom Connect, which is a national scale program that communicates to mothers about caring for themselves and their babies while they're pregnant and up until the baby is 2 years old, and also gives them the opportunity to be able to respond to the messages that they receive, to be able to tell the government about the service that they received at the clinics, and be able to really give feedback and ensure that their voices are heard in the service that they receive from the healthcare system. And it's now a nationally scaled program. It's in 95% of the clinics. We've enrolled 2.7 million mothers to the program since we launched in 2014, which represents about 80% of the mothers giving birth in the public healthcare system since then. So it's a really large-scale program, and I think the idea is that we put women at the center of designing the program. This wasn't something that was designed just with the national department's needs at stake. If we'd done that, we probably just would have done a registry, gathered all the data, put it somewhere, and left it up to the government to make a change. But it's really about empowering women. I think, in fact, our Minister of Health, when he launched the program, said it was a bazooka in every woman's hand, which I thought was a little dramatic, but it gets the point across, is that it's really about empowering women. One of the interesting things for me, though, is that while we had this approach of putting women at the center of what we're doing, when we were asked by Grand Challenges Canada to do a gender analysis of the program, we found some interesting things. And I think what's important for me in taking a gender lens is not to make too many assumptions or to pat ourselves on the back just because we possibly have a lot of women. We really took a critical look at our program and realized that by only communicating to women and not having male partners on the platform, we were actually just perpetuating some of the gender imbalances around maternal health care. And so we're expanding it now to include partners as well. But I think, even if you put women at the center of what you do, I think you still need to look critically and take that gender lens approach and not assume that you're doing a great job just because you have a lot of women on the program.
Great. We'll get back to that. Some more to unpack there. Patrick.
Yes, so thank you all for coming. It's so nice outside in Vancouver, and now we're in this dark room, so props to everybody here. So let me tell you just briefly what MIT Solve is and where I come from. We're a program of the university, MIT in Boston and Cambridge. Leading organization, a leading university of technology, research, and innovation for many years. Solve is a program of the university that's focused on finding and supporting social entrepreneurs who are using technology to address some of the world's biggest challenges. Oftentimes they relate to the SDGs that we're discussing a lot here at Women Deliver. And what we do is we find those entrepreneurs through an open innovation competition, a challenge. And we invite people from all over the world with ideas, with pilots, with established companies to apply, to then be selected through a competitive process. Ultimately, what we do is we find out about those startups' goals, where they're looking to go, where they're looking to grow, and give them a platform to further their work through a community that we manage, through connections to MIT, through funding and other ways too. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that in context. But the issue of gender is something that we take very seriously, and something that I'll talk a lot about is how we as an organization that is working with many other leaders in the space, how we use our own performance metrics, set our own goals, and really put these values of gender inclusion and equity at the core of how we run our work, how we put together our events, how we build our communities of leaders who are working on these challenges, and ultimately how we select the entrepreneurs that we work with.
Great. So Debbie, I want to come back to you. You talked about, your Mom Connect is one of the over 1,000 innovations that Grand Challenges Canada has proudly supported. And you mentioned this gender lens analysis that we asked you to do. Amazing team full of women innovators focused on women's health, right? So you think, okay, why do I need to do a gender analysis? Turning it back over to you, could you talk about a little bit more about what you uncovered by asking those questions, by going through that, and how that shaped your work going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think I probably sound terribly arrogant, but when you asked us to do it, I thought this one will do pretty well at. I think for a change, this one we've got, but it was actually incredibly important for us to do because we decided to make sure that, despite thinking we might have this one, take a very critical look and a step back and to think, there's a very good reason why we've been asked to do this, and we need to take it seriously. Let's take a step back and have a look. And I think, it was really great just to again, remove our blinkers and our blinders and make us realize that even if this is part of what we say that we do and we're striving for it, there's always more that we can do. And it's really important not to rest on our laurels, pat ourselves on the back and move on, but rather to continually critically analyze how we're applying a gender lens to our programs. And so one of the things I mentioned was obviously in the program, we're now going to be including partners. But for our organization as well, we were founded by a male, but we're 63% female. Most of the senior leadership is female. I'm very proud that about 40% of my engineering team are female, which is not the norm in the classes, certainly. And we have what I thought was a great maternity leave, a great paternity leave, lots of things we were doing right. But then when we take another look at that, we realized that although we're doing well within the space in South Africa, we still actually have a long way, even as an organization, to remove some of the things that we've put in place that are preventing us from being really a gender equitable organization in itself as well. Things like the fact that I do have a paternity leave and a maternity leave and not a parental leave policy that I can apply across everybody within the organization. These things are incredibly important. And I also just think one of the really good things about the gender lens approach that you guys asked us to do is not just looking at the program, but also looking at the organization. And that is a little bit of a bugbear of mine, is that I see so many organizations who are developing programs for women, but are not actually in themselves as organizations taking gender equity seriously. And they don't reflect, when you look at the organization, don't reflect the people who they're serving. And I think that it's very important for us to be able to highlight that it's not just the programs, it's also the people developing the programs that need to be making these changes, and to, to reward those organizations who are taking that seriously, because I think there are too few who are just happy that they're doing a program for women or a program for disadvantaged people, but not necessarily taking that seriously as their organization themselves.
So Kristin, maybe you could also speak to that about involving women in your design process and development process and what that has done for your product and business.
Yeah, so when we started, we actually still today, we have all the engineers on our team are men, and that's not necessarily by choice, but it's just that there are maybe about as many as you can count on two hands in terms of applicants that are women. And so, and this is over the course of 4 years that we've been in existence. So we just really haven't had that many applicants. And just talking to my co-founder, in his class, there was one girl. So there are not that many that go into STEM. So that's another topic. But basically, having men develop a sanitary pad is interesting because they don't use them. So first of all, they had to go and look at them and see what they look like. And when they started to make the first prototypes, they made them rectangular. And they thought that, and they look kind of like pillows. And and the women that we showed them to were like, "Why are they so thick?" And They did, yeah. I mean, they took it all well, and they made the adjustments. But I think just the first time that they were exposed to feedback, they were a little bit shocked. So that was good, and I think it's been interesting from both sides, like both having them work on the product, and having them on our team. We do appreciate like having open discussions about it, and it's really, really nice actually to talk to the guys on our team and about periods and menstruation and why these products have to be designed this way. And then sometimes when we go to events and we see the opposite reaction from men coming to talk to us at a booth. I think it's really interesting to have both sides. And in terms of design, I think we would love to have more women on our design team. We actually have interns come from MIT, and all of our interns are girls. And so then our team thought, oh, does MIT only have girls? So that was also kind of funny too. But so I think we're trying to balance it out a bit. And right now we're serving that balance with interns, but we're hoping to see more women in STEM in India apply.
Patrick, so I'm coming to you. What, in your work in supporting these innovators, what has been kind of one of the biggest challenges that you have seen in applying a gender lens or asking them to? What could you share?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and some context is helpful too about the state of innovation, startups, and funding, really. I think funding is probably the biggest gap here. We're working with social entrepreneurs who are early stage. They are trying to raise funds to support the scale up of their work, or even just the modest growth to a new market of their work. And as we all know, that requires funding, especially capital funding at the beginning to scale up. And what we also know about the market is that the amount of investments, at least in the US, that go to women-led enterprises is, I wrote it down because I'm bad with statistics, but is 22 or 2.2% of venture capital funding in the States goes to women-led enterprises. It's an enormous gap, considering that there's other studies that show, one from the Boston Consulting Group that shows women-led enterprises outpace those run by men in terms of revenue yield. So women-led enterprises are earning more revenue than others that are run by men. Another interesting point is that the McKinsey had a report that said if we closed the gender gap across the world in terms of the economy, $12 trillion of value would be created by women-led enterprises. It shows the incredible promise of this world, this ecosystem that we're working in, and the work that people like Kristin are doing. But the cards are not stacked in favor of women-led enterprises. There are huge structural issues, huge financial issues, and big barriers that we have to overcome. So we talk a lot about that. I can share more later on how Solve models a different path forward, and how we try to leverage our position at MIT and on forums like this to carve a new path forward.
So I'll open this up to any of you who want to take this, but we heard, I think it was this morning, from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, talking about intersectionality. So this is obviously, we're talking about a gender lens approach, but there are other things that weave into this analysis. And maybe I'll start with you, Kristin, and you could speak to how you're thinking about that in your work and how that matters and what's the impact that has had.
So for us, I guess our intersectionality is between both women's health and also environment, and really looking at how do we create something that's sustainable. And at first, I think a lot of people don't really think it was important that it's sustainable, but it turns out that if you make a product with natural materials and you don't use chemicals and plastics, they're actually better for health as well. So a lot of women using pads in a very hot climate have been, facing rashes, irritation, sometimes infections as well. And so using a natural product has really helped. So I think in that way, seeing that there can be added benefits by having a solution that covers more than just one area is really great. So,
Debbie, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big things within my own organization, not necessarily the innovation itself, and obviously I'm from South Africa, so it's a bit particularly interesting climate to talk about this, but is intersectionality between gender, race, and disability as well. And I think too many programs are dominated by white men and delivering solutions for people of color, women of color particularly. And I think it's really important that we start to take a hard look at our organizations and how we're representative or not representative of the people that we're serving.
Patrick, I'd love to hear from you too. I mean, for us, being a funder, and thanks to the leadership of Global Affairs Canada, we certainly look at the environmental sustainability, human rights and inclusion, non-binary gender. How does MIT Solve think about that in the work that you do?
Yeah, it gets back to what I mentioned when I introduced myself, how Solve incorporates goals and performance measures in the work that we do, where we crowdsource solutions to some of the challenges that we issue, so anyone, anywhere can apply. But when it comes to the criteria that we use to select, we have our organizational criteria around social impact, use of technology, potential for scale, things of that nature. But also in there are goals that we have around making sure that our pipeline of submissions and where we're making efforts to do outreach is aligned with how we want our cohort of entrepreneurs to look in terms of their backgrounds, their identities, and where they're from. So we do a lot of work, our team does a lot of work to isolate those areas that we need to make extra effort to reach out to. And oftentimes that falls around geography, it falls around gender and other characteristics too. What we've found is that by doing that and by having a concerted effort around those goals, we've had in all of our challenges across our 3 years of doing this, over half of our teams are led by women. In 2018, it was 62% of our teams are women-led in terms of the founders or executives of the organizations. And oftentimes what happens is, I think, especially with the health entrepreneurs that I support, not only are they female-led, but they are going on to develop products or to develop innovations that are further serving populations that include women. Karen is here actually in the audience. She's one of our entrepreneurs who has developed Medicapt, which is a technology, a digital tool that can capture and save and document evidence of sexual violence for prosecution and for a whole host of other purposes. It's an example of, this is a venture that's led by a woman that has gone on with ripple effects to help other women as well. So I think that's how we view it. We try to make sure that our efforts are aligned with those goals, and then we make sure that the people involved with our work also reflect what we want our community to look like.
So audience, I'm going to be coming to you shortly for questions, so start getting those going. Another question that I have for all the panelists is the role of men and, where relevant, boys in your work, and how that has been important or where you see gaps. Maybe we could start with you, Demi, on that one.
I think this is actually a little bit of a personal story, but our founder is a male, Gustav Prekelt, and he very purposefully decided a number of years ago that he wanted the organization to be more representative of the people that we serve, and specifically supported my growth within the organization to then take it on. And I think there are not many founders who would be willing to step back from their baby and hand it over to people who they maybe are feeling a little bit tense about. And I think, it was really an intentional thing. And I think the thing about you have male allies and the amount of change they can make within an organization, just by his supporting my growth within the organization, most of the other teams within the organization have adapted and have now become much more gender diverse. And I think it's really, really critical to realize that women are fighting. Sometimes we're tired of fighting. I've heard a lot at this conference about people feeling tired and frustrated by all the fighting. And one male stepping in and being an ally and pulling up one female can have so much impact. And I think that that's really important to remember.
Yeah, that's great. And in your program, the Mom Connect, I know you touched on this a bit, but could you just unpack a little bit more about the role of dads? I just think it's really powerful.
Yeah, great. So in South Africa, we have quite shocking statistics around the role of dads in caring for their children. In previously disadvantaged communities, only 78%. 78% of mothers do not live with the father of their child, and most of them are single. And so they are very much responsible for bringing up children. There is very little enforcement of child support, and there's very little support from men. And I think the role of men, as a result, we almost ignored the role of men initially. But seeing a demand actually from our users, but also from doing this gender analysis, that by bringing men into the program and actually communicating with them, we're opening up an opportunity for them to support their wives or the mothers of their children in a way that they'd never actually understood. And we're teaching them things that they were not taught by their fathers, around how to care for the child, how to even create an emotional bond with the child, and the needs of the mother during pregnancy and after birth. So I think it's incredibly important to remember that even if the stats say that men are not involved, it doesn't mean that we can't actually create a change, and make sure that they're brought along and that they feel comfortable having a larger role with their babies.
Kristin, do you want to speak to this one?
So I think for us, we also really encourage including men in the conversation about menstruation. And it also has been really interesting for us. We go to a lot of events around India, and we've seen the gamut of different responses from men. So it's anything from a group of middle school boys coming over and saying, "Oh, what do you do?" And then I say we make sanitary pads, and then they start giggling, and I try to finish the 2-sentence pitch and then they run away. But I think that's true of any middle school boy. That's not just in India. So it's just, a matter of the age. But then I think we also get, husbands and fathers coming and saying, oh, this is such an awesome product. I want to get one for my wife or for my daughter. And then even explaining to them why this is important. So I think really having those supporters and champions to help spread the word and talk to their family about it too. Sometimes the women are shy, and they once they see that their husband's okay talking about it, then they're like, okay, I can talk about it in public too. It's okay. So I think we've seen both sides, and it's really refreshing to see the support that we're getting. So.
And Patrick, what have you seen in your portfolio?
Yeah, so many of the entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, that we support are women-led enterprises. But one thing that's coming to mind is a survey that we sent out to our entrepreneurs after a big event that we just had. And we asked, typical questions that you do in a survey, things that worked, things that didn't. But then the freeform section is where you always get the really important information that isn't captured elsewhere. And in there was a comment from one of our teams that we support, and she mentioned that it was really tough to be in a space where she was the only woman at the table trying to represent her work, trying to bring money in and make new partnerships. But everyone at the table on the funder side, on the potential supporter side, people from corporations, from foundations and whatnot, were men. And that was a tough spot. It was a tough spot because it's indicative of some of those structural issues, issues of power, issues of equity, where even when Solve puts forward some of the most promising innovations, many of which are led by women, that we're still facing more institutional legacy issues of money and power being controlled largely by men. Not exclusively, of course, but it was enough of a presence, even at a program that is intentional, for someone to comment on it through that form. But I'm sure others felt that way too. And it's a big challenge that goes beyond one organization or even our collective organizations here to make it better.
So I have lots more questions, but I also want to get a sense. Can you put your hand up if you have a question that you'd like to ask of the panelists, and I'll judge timing. Anybody yet? Still thinking? Okay. It's after lunch. Kristin, yes. Do you want to answer that?
Well, I just want to add one.
Please.
Okay. One more thing that I guess I want to add in terms of the anecdote. I think it's also really important for us to think about different ways to open the conversation. So, I mean, I guess like it's easy to say, oh, we should spread awareness and talk to more men about the issues that we're facing. But I think some of the ways that we take, like channels that we take to open the conversation are like for guys who come and we're in a college and they come to our booth, we say, oh, we're a manufacturing company and we make sanitary pads, but we're looking for engineering interns. So if you're interested, we can tell you more about what we do. And that just like kind of puts us on the same playing field, and then we can get more into the social aspect or the product itself or some of the other things. And that's not always relevant depending on the role that they're taking on anyway. So I think just thinking of different ways to just at least say, let's have more than a one sentence conversation, and so that we can see if we can figure out more ways that we connect. And I guess this is good for anyone, but particularly since we're in femtech and then we're trying to have more men talk about it. That's a suggestion.
That's great. So my next question for the panelists are resources, and I'm going to take an opportunity to, as moderator, to talk about two also. So while you're thinking about the answer to this, what have been resources that you have come across that has been helpful in thinking this through that you could tell our audience about? I have two that I want to highlight. First, Grand Challenges Canada, we have a gender equality portal. We encourage everyone to go there. It's on our website, and it will give you resources on how to take a gender lens approach to innovating, asking the questions, thinking about this work. So it's all up there. And then the other one, which I have a copy of here, is Toward Bridging Gender Equality and Innovation. This is a report of the International Development Innovation Alliance. That's a group of funders, governments, Grand Challenges Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and other funders that have looked at this approach. It's online on the IDIA website, which both of them are up there on the screen. So highly encourage you to check those out, free resources. Over to the panelists. What resources have you found helpful? If you have any, you could share. Maybe Patrick?
Yeah, one thing that immediately comes to mind is something we're very proud of at Solve, which is coalitions that we're a part of. The one that comes to mind is the She Innovates coalition that we have been a part of. It is sponsored by UN Women, as well as a number of corporate sponsors and NGOs too. The campaign has many goals, but for Solve, it involves two things: testimonials from our entrepreneurs that talk about the ways that they are addressing some of the issues that we're discussing here today, But then also this group has sponsored grant funding for our entrepreneurs, and it's been a key source of support in addressing, albeit on a limited scale, the big funding gap that I mentioned earlier. And that's something that Solve is very much focused on a more strategic level as we move forward too. Beyond just one-off grants, we're in the early stages of developing our own impact investment fund to actually invest in the entrepreneurs that we select. And that's one of the ways that we're looking to explicitly highlight that gap and systematically address it through our platform. So if you haven't already, check out the She Innovates prize as our coalition there. There's many resources on there about, regarding this topic.
Great. Debbie or Kristen, anything to add?
I actually don't have anything very structured, but I have to say the places where I've really felt like I've gotten the most support is through other women in tech, who I find generally are extremely open to discuss what they are dealing with and how they've managed to overcome this problem, or maybe not that problem. This one's still a big one. And I think just being able to be really open and honest with each other, and just hearing that the problems I have are the same that the problems that somebody else has, even if we don't quite have a solution for it just yet, is incredibly encouraging, kind of gives you the energy to keep going. And I think there are a lot of really great organizations like YPO and various other organizations that bring together young entrepreneurs. I personally haven't found one like that specifically for women. And so I just connect to every woman in tech I can find, talk to them as much as possible. And we've kind of created our own little network. And I think coming to conferences and stuff like this is also a fantastic place to meet people and really talk about those challenges and just feel like you're part of a group fighting towards something.
Kristen, do you want to add anything?
One resource that I think I found really helpful is Cartier Women's Initiative. So they have a whole huge network of women entrepreneurs. So that's been really, really great to be part of that network and to see all the different issues that women are addressing around the world.
Okay. So my last question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up, so thank you, is, we've been asked at this convening to make sure that we're being action-oriented, and that while we're being inspired and we're learning from each other, we're going to leave here and take action. So I'm going to ask all the panelists, and I'm also going to take prerogative and put my own on. What is your one, recommendation or action-oriented step that either you're going to take or you hope the people in this room will take related to this topic? So Patrick, we'll start with you.
Great. So the one that comes to mind is Solve relies on people like you to identify entrepreneurs, startups, NGOs, people with ideas that address the challenges that we issue each year. Right now, our 4 challenges are open for submissions. And I invite everyone here, if you, in the midst of this conversation, if you are able to identify or think of someone that you know who is innovating in this area, point them towards us. Tell them that they should apply to Solve. You can talk with the Solver teams, the entrepreneurs here today about their experience and what that was like and what it's helped them with. We rely on everyone to make the crowdsourcing model work that we have. So my ask would be for everyone here to refer someone to the challenge so that they can potentially benefit from the community that we're building around the world.
Great. Good one. Debbie?
I think mine would be I think probably everybody in the room is here for a specific reason. You probably all already have programs or technologies or ideas that are focused on women and empowering women, and that's fantastic. But just remember that sometimes you still need to take a critical look at what you're doing and really place that lens on it, and step back and say, am I somehow perpetuating systems by focusing just on women, and should I be including other actors more? So I think it's just taking that step back, looking critically at it, not being afraid to take that critical look at your programs.
Kristen.
I think a little bit in line of trying to create a community. If you're in a position of creating something new, or are in a position of leadership, I think looking at things holistically and considering the problem that you're solving. Are you solving only one problem to create another? That was something that we looked at early on. So looking at access to sanitary pads and realizing that we would be creating a huge waste problem. So kind of thinking further down the line, where does it all end? That's one thing. But if you're not in the business of creating something, I think offering support or mentorship or guidance to those who are can really help as well.
So for us at Grand Challenges Canada, while we will continue to support initiatives like our Safe Abortion Challenge and funding for maternal, newborn, and child health innovations, we're also really motivated to make sure that when we're supporting male-led innovations that maybe are, providing a low-cost knee joint, that they're also taking a gender lens, right? Because we're in a room, I think it's fair to say, with the converted, those who know that this is really important. And how are we going to use our work, our slice of the world, to make sure that those that aren't thinking that way are going to become more gender intentional? Because it's not just good for women and girls, it's good for business, it's better for the planet, and it's critically important. So that's our commitment in this space. So I would love to open it up. I know it's after lunch, but I think I saw at least one question over here. So perhaps if you could either speak loudly, or we might have a roaming mic that could come to the front. Yeah, lovely.
About the gender lens. When we talk about the gender lens, we only talk about women and girls. It's extremely frustrating. I mean, I came with this session especially from the perspective of that how do we look into gender lens from the perspective of looking into the larger picture of gender. I think we are missing here transgender women big time. If we are talking about innovation and we are talking about larger technology, I think we have to be open enough, have acknowledgement that there are 1% of the world population living as transgender people, and there are a lot of transgender women who are vulnerable for HIV/AIDS. They're vulnerable for gender-based violence, and in fact, within the patriarchal society, they don't even get an opportunity to be acknowledged as human being, as an individuals. My specific question was to Patrick, that since Patrick has been looking into a lot of innovations which is for the social entrepreneurship, would you be open up to have that perspective of gender lens to accumulate data or support information related to the transgender women? Because in India, we have a system called as Empower. Empower is something which is specifically on paperless reporting system. So we are actually empowering transgender women to capture the data on HIV/AIDS, gender-based violence, access to medication, which is specifically on ARV and all those kind of things. And such kind of program needs support in a big time because a lot of transgender women are dying on the field, and that's a harsh reality of the society. I think if you don't broaden up the spectrum of gender, we will stick to the traditional aspects of looking into the women and girls, which is also important. But at the same time, we have to rethink about the gender lens at this point of time.
No, it's incredibly well taken. Debbie and I were talking before, and it was one of the questions. Perhaps Patrick, if you want to address that, and if anyone else, this kind of non-binary approach to gender lens and how that has influenced your work. It's a really well taken question. Thank you.
Yeah, very much appreciate the question. Two things come to mind, one of which is how Solve actually designs our challenges. We take very broad approach to deciding the topics that we choose. For the next year, we will focus on healthy cities and our health-related work. You mentioned health is the area that you're working in. Within that, it's characterized quite broadly, which can accommodate many, many types of solutions and many types of uses of technology and organizing power. So limited on what you just shared there, potentially you should apply to our challenge and to represent your solution. But when it comes to making sure that we are using a broad lens when talking about gender, that makes me think about the way that Solve designs our challenges, and it creates an opportunity for many people from different backgrounds to participate and give their input. We actually launched last year an online platform to encourage voting, as well as individual submissions of ideas to actually get to seed input from people all over the world. They don't have to come to this event. They don't have to come to Vancouver. They don't have to know someone on our team. It's really about creating new pathways for people to give their input. So that's not fully addressing the challenge that you are mentioning, but as it relates back to our program, that we are trying to intentionally create pathways for people to participate with different backgrounds and with different perspectives. It's very much at the core of what we're doing.
The specific program I was talking about today was Mom Connect, which is a maternal and child health program. But we do a lot of work in sexual and reproductive health and rights, particularly with adolescents. And I think one of the key things that we've learned there is to really start to engage young people with conversations around all of the things that affect them, gender being one of them, HIV being another, sexual violence being another, and bringing forward the voices of young people. And I think technology has an amazing role to play in that. It can be a great equalizer as long as you're ensuring that your program reaches everyone. It has an amazing way of making voices that were previously not heard. And I think there's a really big opportunity to use technology to hear from individual people and not just big conglomerations of groups of people, bring their voices to the fore and expose more and more people to those voices. And I think that that's, for me, is one of the powers of technology that I can see. Of course, it comes with its evils as well, like the fact that people can be trolled and victimized on these kinds of platforms. So we need to think very carefully about how we design our technology platforms to bring forward the voices, but to ensure that there isn't that kind of violence perpetrated online as well. But for me, that's one of the things that makes me excited about technology, is the opportunity for it to be able to bring out voices who have previously not been heard before. So I hope that you do get to do that program, because it sounds like a very, very good one.
Excellent. Thank you. I think I saw another hand. Yeah, please.
The actual company, even though we've increased the diversity of the staff, often the people I hear speaking in meetings are predominantly white and predominantly male. So I'm curious what you have done within your organizations to create a culture where that is not the case, or if there's specific trainings that you do, et cetera. Like, how do you create that space in the company itself?
Be careful, I could speak to you about this for like the next 2 hours. I think when we decided that we wanted to really be much more intentional about growing people of color within our organization, one of the things that we did was to create an open dialogue on our digital platforms, but also in our physical meetings around issues of diversity. And to be brutally honest, the first 12 months were hell. There were a lot of really hurt people. who needed to voice the way that they have been treated, not necessarily by their colleagues, but by the world out there for their whole lives. And they needed their colleagues to be able to see that. And for a while, it was a really rocky sea. And a lot of people felt really, really hurt. But I'm really, really glad that we pushed through that, because now I look at my team and you cannot believe how supportive they are about each other and how much they come together around the idea of diversity. And one of the big things that we keep saying, not just me, but we keep saying within the organization is, if we wanted this to be easy, we could very easily have kept a non-diverse team. That's the easiest way to move forward. You don't fight with each other. You're all happy. You keep going. And you can pat yourself on the back that you've done such a great job of keeping your staff happy. You have to embrace the uncomfortableness that comes with having a diverse team. And you have to understand that uncomfortableness, or you have to believe, I think, that the uncomfortableness is ultimately going to get you to a better solution. It is going to make a better solution for your end users. It's going to make a better company for you. And so it is worth going through the uncomfortableness. And if you're not willing to embrace the uncomfortableness, you're not going to be able to move through the change. And you're just going to hire people who are going to leave again, because you don't actually have an inclusive culture, you just have a diverse team, and those are two different things. So I think it's incredibly important to embrace that uncomfortable feeling that is going to happen in your organization if you make this move. It is worth moving through it if you truly believe that it's going to make a difference to your work, and I truly believe that it is. But you can't be scared of that. Otherwise, you're just going to be floating in a sea.
Well said. Thank you. Kristin, anything you want to add? I mean, certainly at Grand Challenges Canada, we've been thinking about also how we bring in people impacted by the work that we do. We have a humanitarian Grand Challenge, and bringing people in who have been affected by, Syrian refugee crisis, and that has created a more diverse team in terms of both gender, but also race, but they come from incredibly different but incredibly important perspectives, and so we've been trying to acknowledge that we weren't doing a good enough job on that. So lots of work still to be done. Any other questions? Yes, please, at the back there, at the side back.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm the program coordinator for a STEM outreach program that primarily works with youth. We target youth in grades 2 to 9, so we look at kids as young as 6 and as old as like 13, 14. And my whole entire job is to engage them in this world of STEM. All three of you pointed out that hiring diverse people is very, very difficult because there is a really low prevalence of female engineers. There's really low prevalence of the LGBTQ 2S community involved in technical sciences like computer science or entrepreneurship. And one of the big kind of reflections on that as a whole is getting our youth engaged at the primary school level and teaching them that STEM and education is a place for everyone, regardless of their background. So what can we do, as tech-forward communities and tech-forward NGOs to better involve communities at all levels to start creating these safe and diverse spaces for kids as young as 6?
Do you have something, Kristin? Yeah.
So ever since I was in 5th grade, I think that's when I got excited about robotics. And so that's, I think my mom sent me to computer class in 3rd grade, and that's where I first got exposed. But I think just having role models is good, exposing kids to the cool things that you can do in engineering. So at my high school, I was really excited about sharing more of the stuff that you can do in engineering that's not just, designing cars or things like that. So I would bring all the cool engineering projects that I could find on the internet, and I post them around the school. But that wasn't necessarily the most effective way. But we had a robotics team as well, so we tried to encourage other people in our class to get involved and get excited and see all the potential that the field has. So I was interested in mechanical engineering, so it was more design and even product design. So a lot of people don't think that as a mechanical engineer it makes sense that I would end up making a sanitary pad, but it's actually pretty. I think it's a pretty natural transition because it's still a product at the end of the day, and it's a physical product. There's no electronics in it, so it works out. But I think getting more girls to see what the options are, and there are now a lot of learning kits and tools and different exciting things that kind of expose girls to engineering and science as well.
Personally, I think maybe I took a little bit of a different journey in my life. I've always enjoyed engineering and science and was really passionate about it up until I left school. Well, I'm still passionate about it, so not that exactly, but when I went to university and there was a class of 180 and there were 8 of us who were female, I suddenly realized that I wasn't just a nerd, but I was a girl nerd, which I hadn't realized until then, which might seem weird. I was 18, but I hadn't realized that at that point. And so I think exposing girls to technology at a young age is amazing. But I personally feel like there starts to be this point in a girl's life where she loses her faith in her being able to do it, even though she's been doing it all the time up until now and having great fun. And for me, that's more around adolescence, and maybe for me a little bit later than adolescence. But I feel exposure early is amazing, but we're still going to see a massive drop-off unless we address that time in a girl's life and address how boys and men treat her at that time in her life. I think that's critical for me.
And I'll add, I think as funders, one of the things we can do, it's not as early as, grade 6, but certainly making sure that we're funding young entrepreneurs and not that they have to have all the degrees and all the accolades, but really encouraging those young entrepreneurs and taking a chance. I think the second thing we really need to do is do better at storytelling, telling the stories about innovations and women entrepreneurs or, that can get out there and so that you can see a vision for yourself that isn't just being a car mechanic, right? And that's a job that we can do. We'll take one last question. One of those over there, whoever can get to the mic, sorry. I was going to give you half an hour for questions, but nobody put it. Wait, no, it takes time to warm up. I get it.
Okay, mine is not a question here. I just want to add to what we're doing, how we can have these young women to technology. I teach and I am working with a Toronto-based organization. It's called Hacker Girl Hackathon. And I've been doing these hackathons with my grade 7s, 6s, and grade 8 girls every year. And we run it 2 times in a year. And I feel like that's been very effective because it brings the girls out of their comfort zone. And when we show them the videos about how, these big companies have the woman behind their back who started those companies. And this is one of the things that I feel like, those organizations that are bringing those young coders to the world, they need to be funded. They need to be recognized all over the world. And that's pretty much. So that's what I'm doing. And I think that can be Megan's question too, where you need to connect with those organizations that are working with these young leaders. And in the education, I think we need to change the literature. We need to get out of those fairy tales, and we need to change it around these big leaders, and we need to share their stories. So that's pretty much. Thank you.
Well, I think we're out. Yeah, I think we're out of time, as far as I understand, and so I want to keep us on track. I know that there's a lot of exciting other things going on today, so we'll call it to an end. We have our contact information up there. Please check out the resources online. Thank you for being here, and maybe a round of applause to our panelists.